wall. It's meant to be basically an invisible wall that uses a combination of surveillance and drone technology to basically intercept anyone crossing the border in a non-authorized way. So that presumably includes both people crossing from Mexico into the U.S. and people crossing from the U.S. To Mexico. And again, it's framed in terms of efficiency and all of that. You don't have to have necessarily border agents there. You can have drones that are currently not lethal but could be made lethal at any point, and that is basically what they envision as the future of the wall. And obviously a lot of Trump supporters, I think, originally had envisioned a physical wall and not this combo of non-lethal, potentially in the future lethal drone technology, and even worse, to get people to consent to these systems specifically. And I think a lot of what we're going to see is going to be sort of a repeated trope of what we saw on the War on Terror. We have to give up all of these new freedoms, or all of these freedoms and things like that, because we have to go after Al-Qaeda and get them at all costs. But now, 20 plus years later, you have the head of Al-Qaeda in Syria being given a diplomat. I don't even know what to call it. It's so ridiculous. Like a red carpet welcome to shake hands with David Petraeus and all of this. So we lost all of our freedoms, but now Al-Qaeda is just let's shake hands and let them come to the UN while we don't let anyone from Palestine come. I mean, it's totally insane.
The United States is preparing for something that most of the world is not ready to confront. Military postures are hardening, nuclear restraint is fading, and even the discussion of renewed US nuclear testing is back at a moment when tensions with Russia, China, and in the Arctic involving Canada are already dangerously high. When the world's most powerful military signals that old taboos no longer apply, it ignites a chain reaction the entire planet will feel.
Multinational corporations, many of them based in the West, making joint ventures with the communist-owned, state-owned enterprises in the East, Russia and China, and that these were essentially fusing to form an economic structure that was unaccountable to any government in the world.
This isn't Cold War nostalgia. This is a new era with fewer rules and faster reactions. Rival powers no longer wait for explosions to respond. They respond to signals, posture, and intent. When restraint weakens, suspicion fills the gap, and the United States doesn't need to detonate a nuclear weapon to shake the world. Preparation alone does that. When readiness is maintained, infrastructure is preserved, and testing is openly discussed again, the signal is clear. Escalation is back on the table.
Ostensible adversaries like Russia, China, the United States, most of the West, all agree about the, sustainable development goals of the United Nations, which if you actually look into the SDGs, a lot of it is about sort of pushing us into this fourth industrial revolution where life becomes increasingly digitized and increasingly surveillable. And really, I would ultimately argue is about the creation of new markets at the end of the day. And a lot of the push for digital ID is in that. And that's why some have argued that this is sort of a policy that's being implemented globally. And it is true.
The moment that signal is sent, the chain reaction begins. Russia treats restraint as conditional and sharpens its nuclear posture to preserve parity in a world without firm arms control limits. China gains political cover to accelerate its expansion outside treaty frameworks, increase warhead production, and fuse nuclear growth with AI-driven command and early warning systems. Allies absorb the same message and harden their defenses because missile warning times are short, bomber routes are predictable, and hesitation carries real risk.
Onboarded the FBI and Secret Service on that platform, on their platform, and that essentially makes it a digital arm, you could argue, of the U.S. government. And when you take under, when you also consider this military manual that was published by WikiLeaks, well over a decade ago, they referred to, basically the dollar and some of these style of financial institutions that help propagate it globally, particularly in the global South, as sort of weapons, financial weapons of U.S. empire.
For decades, nuclear strategy revolved around a single standoff between the United States and Russia. That world is gone. Today's reality is a three-front rivalry unfolding at the same time, with no shared rules and no clear stabilizer.
In the global South is national security threats to the United States. And wanted to implement policies to reduce their population size for example, and sort of had what I would argue was a eugenicist bent to some of his policies. And he was one of the mentors, of course, to people that have become infamous in recent years, like the World Economic Forum chairman Klaus Schwab. Some of his more infamous quotes that he's known for refer to, soldiers being, pawns of foreign policy, essentially sort of like, people's lives are just, pawns on a chessboard for the sort of the elite figures to move around, for their benefit.
Global nuclear rivalry is no longer contained. The US faces Russia with collapsed to treaties, China with rapid nuclear and AI-driven expansion, and an Arctic that has become a strategic corridor where reaction times shrink to minutes. Geography pulls Canada into the front line, turning the high north from a buffer into a pressure point where continental defense and global competition merge. Canada isn't choosing militarization, it's responding to shrinking warning windows and unavoidable missile routes over the pole. NORAD upgrades, Arctic radar, and integrated command systems reflect a system with no margin for delay, where escalation is built into permanent readiness rather than triggered by crisis.
But invasive AI surveillance systems on citizens will help them be on their best behavior, which is a rather Orwellian thing to say, and sort of very much feeds into the idea of the panopticon, where if someone is always being watched, the panopticon, is used in the context of surveillance a lot, but it was originally a model for a prison where prisoners are always being, or under the impression they're always being watched, but they can't directly see the people watching them.
Here's the dangerous part. When power focuses on eliminating uncertainty, escalation becomes structural. Tension stays high by design. Surveillance expands to maintain order. Military posture hardens to preserve dominance. This isn't a reactive defense. It's managed escalation, engineered to keep every rival guessing and every population compliant while the system runs hotter year after year. This is where the tension sharpens. Donald Trump approaches power through deals, leverage, and optics. Success gets measured in wins, numbers, and pressure points. That mindset reshapes how military power gets used on the global stage. Whitney Webb traces this style back to a culture of backroom negotiations, influence trading, and calculated escalation. In that framework, military posture turns into bargaining leverage. Nuclear signaling becomes a way to raise stakes. Readiness becomes a message aimed as much at rivals as at allies and domestic audiences.
Someone like Trump's radar as a businessman, he's focused on sort of the bottom line, the number, the success of the negotiation, and how successful it looks, frankly, whether it's to his base or to businessmen he wants to court, or, other people. Foreign leaders,
Here's why that matters. When leadership views geopolitics as a series of deals, weapons stop being last resort safeguards and start becoming negotiating tools. Pressure replaces patience. Escalation signals get deployed to force outcomes. And in a world already primed by collapsing treaties and rising rivalry, that approach pushes the system closer to permanent confrontation rather than controlled balance. And the shift most people still underestimate. Modern war runs on technology long before it ever runs on weapons. AI systems, data networks, surveillance platforms, and real-time analytics now shape how decisions are made, how threats are identified, and how fast leaders feel forced to act. This is where the rivalry between the United States and China becomes especially dangerous. To keep pace, the US is pulling private tech deeper into military planning, turning cloud systems, predictive software, and commercial AI into core defense infrastructure. What starts in the civilian world quickly becomes part of command, targeting, and early warning systems.
So in order to outdo them, we must drastically increase our user base of these AI technologies, which includes things they say like, surveillance, as I mentioned earlier, facial recognition, expanding that, expanding e-commerce, reducing in-person shopping, and really, other in-person activities, including healthcare, in-person doctor visits, moving to telemedicine as much as possible. And this was really a big focus of that commission, which was the meeting of the national security state and the big tech industry in the years prior to COVID-19. And a lot of that push into the digital realm was a consequence of a lot of COVID-19 era policies that's helped sort of feed that ambition. But I think with this goal to have an increased investment in AI infrastructure.
One, the problem is speed. As machines process information faster than humans, pressure builds to decide sooner and react earlier. Leaders begin trusting automated assessments more than diplomacy or delay. In that environment, restraint feels risky, and hesitation feels like falling behind. This is where domestic policy and global power start to overlap. Governments use surveillance systems, data analysis, and predictive tools to monitor behavior and reduce uncertainty inside their own borders. These systems shape how people act by encouraging compliance and discouraging risk, often without direct force. The same approach carries into military strategy. Predictive models, early warning systems, and real-time monitoring promise better control and faster reactions. They aim to remove uncertainty from decision-making, especially during crises, by identifying threats earlier and narrowing response options.
It needs to outcompete China in AI specifically, and some of the National Security Commission on AI comments and presentations they gave that have since been released through Freedom of Information Act requests essentially suggest that the roadmap to doing so is to impose lots of domestic surveillance and AI-powered surveillance technology on the American public as a way to sort of leapfrog China, because they argue that China has already done that.
Over time, this creates a feedback loop. A society accustomed to constant monitoring supports a security posture built on constant readiness. That readiness encourages more assertive behavior abroad, which in turn justifies tighter control at home. As this cycle continues, escalation becomes easier to sustain, and stepping back starts to feel more dangerous than pressing forward. This is where everything converges. Arms control treaties have collapsed, nuclear taboos are thinning, and an AI-driven arms race is accelerating faster than diplomacy can react. Military planning now assumes constant competition, constant readiness, and constant pressure from rivals who move at machine speed. In this environment, every signal gets amplified. A posture shift in Washington ripples through Moscow and Beijing. A radar upgrade in the Arctic tightens calculations across North America and Europe. Each response justifies the next one, and escalation feeds itself through expectation alone.
It was about essentially banking the unbanked in the global south. That was sort of the framing of it. But in reality, that bank had been set up by the CIA. And it was involved in all sorts of things, including laundering profits for arms trafficking, drug trafficking. It came under scrutiny as part of the Iran-Contra scandal, and of course it collapsed in 1991 and was the subject of a Senate report that I would encourage people to read because it is really quite scandalous. And it also revealed that they were not only doing, engaging in brazen financial crimes on behalf of intelligence agencies all over the world.
Fear becomes the lubricant that keeps the system running. Leaders sell readiness as protection, surveillance as safety, and expansion as stability. The public gets conditioned to permanent tension, while allies harden their positions to avoid surprise. This is the end game taking shape, a world locked into high alert where standing down feels risky, slowing down feels dangerous, and escalation feels easier than restraint. Once that mindset settles in, tension stops being temporary and starts becoming the permanent operating system of global power. The change is already taking hold, power is moving faster, restraint is thinning, and systems built for speed are beginning to control decisions. Military readiness becomes constant, surveillance becomes routine, and escalation turns into the easy choice. In that kind of world, danger doesn't arrive suddenly, it builds quietly until permanent tension feels normal.